At my daughter's wedding, her new husband, who was wealthy, hid me behind a wall of flowers as if I were a shameful secret. His mother whispered about my church lady dress. They didn't know that this simple widow had $18 million and a storm of justice they would never forget. My name is Sylvia Monroe. I'm 72 years old, a retired history teacher and widow living in the quiet, historic neighborhood of Collier Heights in Atlanta. For most of my life, my world was built on two foundations, my faith and the unconditional love I felt for my only daughter, Emma. I believed love was a shield. I was mistaken. It was a target, and the first shot was fired on her wedding day. You know, there's a certain kind of smile a mother saves for her child's wedding day. It's not just a smile of joy, it's the culmination of a life full of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and silent sacrifices. That was the smile I was practicing in front of the mirror that morning, the day Emma was getting married. I adjusted the color of my charcoal gray dress. It wasn't a Lenox Square design. It wasn't something that would appear in a magazine. It was simply a well-made garment. Its dignity lay in its perfect tailoring, a silent statement from a retired history teacher who believed dignity isn't measured by price tags. Around my neck, I placed the soft, cool weight of my grandmother's pearls. They weren't flashy, but they carried the history of the women in my family. Women who had stood strong in times far more challenging than these. My silver and black hair had been carefully styled by my friend Martha in her small salon in Collier Heights. I didn't want to look spectacular. I just wanted to look dignified, worthy of the moment, worthy of the love I felt, and above all, not to be an embarrassment to my daughter. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a 72-year-old woman ready to be the proud, silent backdrop to her daughter in a dazzling close-up. That was all I intended, to watch my little girl, my Emma, walk down that aisle and step into her future. The venue was in Buckhead, a world away from my quiet neighborhood in Atlanta. It was a palace with marble floors and cascading crystal chandeliers. Upon arrival, the air vibrated with the scent of money and high-end perfumes. Emma spotted me near the entrance, her face a beautiful portrait of bridal anxiety. She approached, gave me a quick hug, and her words were a hurried whisper. "You look great, Mom." And then she was off, swept away by a wedding coordinator with an earpiece and a checklist. I understood, of course. The bride is the busiest person in the world. I gathered my small purse and headed to the young man at the guest book. I presented my invitation with my name elegantly scripted, Mrs. Sylvia Monroe. He looked at the card and then at me, and for a fleeting moment a flicker of confusion or perhaps pity crossed his face. "Ah, yes," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Table 12, ma'am. It's right over there behind the big floral arrangement." I followed his pointing finger. Big was an understatement for the floral arrangement. It was a fortress of white lilies and baby's breath, a fragrant wall that could easily hide a small car, and behind it, concealed in the shadows, was table 12, my table. It was a deliberate act of concealment, as clear as if they had hung a sign, "Mother of the bride, unseen." A chill unrelated to the air conditioning settled in my heart. It was the first cold stone in what would become a mountain of indignity. Then they arrived. The Thornfields, Marcus's parents, burst in, not as guests but as royalty in their court. Patricia, my daughter's new mother-in-law, glided across the floor. She didn't stop to greet me. Not really. She slowed down, her eyes making a quick and brutal assessment from my sensible shoes to my carefully styled hair. Her gaze landed on my grandmother's pearls. "How lovely," she said, and I can still remember the way she elongated the word, turning a compliment into a weapon. "So nostalgic." She didn't wait for a response. With a mocking little smile, she turned away and air-kissed more important guests, leaving me standing in the wake of her perfume and disdain. I knew exactly what nostalgic meant in her world. It was a synonym for irrelevant, for poor. It was a verdict imposed on my life, my story, and the memory of the woman who first wore those pearls. It was an invisible slap administered with perfect elegance, I headed toward my designated exile. I sat at table 12. From my vantage point, the altar was completely obscured. I couldn't see the minister. I couldn't see Marcus. I couldn't see my daughter's face. All I could see were the backs of other people's heads and, on the opposite wall, a large, ornate mirror. So I watched my only daughter, Mary, reflected back at me. I saw myself, an older, solitary black woman dressed in a simple gray dress, becoming invisible at her own daughter's celebration. It was a secret they needed to keep, a remnant of the past they hoped to erase from their bright future. I maintained a polite, serene smile on my face, like a retired teacher. It was the performance of my life, but behind that smile, as I observed the specter of a wedding in a golden mirror, a storm was brewing. It wasn't a storm of thunder and rain, but a cold, silent, utterly relentless clarity. The storm I had felt approaching during the wedding did not break with thunder and lightning. It arrived 3 days later, carried on the silky, treacherous currents of my new son-in-law's voice. Marcus called me, his tone a master class in false affection. I can still hear him, a poison sweet as honey. "Mama Sylvia," he began. The false intimacy of the title made my teeth clench. "I hope you had a wonderful time. I really want us to have a private dinner to get to know each other better." It wasn't a question. The rhythm, the careful pause, it was a call disguised as an invitation. I felt a familiar chill, the same cold I had sensed behind that wall of flowers. It was the next act of the play. He chose a restaurant in Buckhead, a place so ostentatious that the very air seemed to vibrate with the sound of money. It was a world of whispering voices, of silverware clinking against porcelain, with a silent reverence, a world where I felt less like a guest and more like an exhibit. I wore a simple black dress, my silent armor of dignity, keeping my head held high as I entered. I knew it wasn't a family dinner meant to build bridges. It was a corporate takeover, and I was the asset being evaluated for acquisition. He started the evening with a flawless performance of concern, his brow furrowed in a certain way, his voice softened to a careful tone as he asked about my life. She inquired if I felt lonely in that big house, all by myself. She wondered aloud, her tone laced with faint concern, whether managing everything on my own wouldn't be terribly complicated for a woman my age. She wove a string of words about financial security and the treacherous world of scammers targeting the elderly. She was a brilliant artist, painting a picture of a dangerous, predatory world. And at the center of it she placed me, a fragile widow, helpless and slightly incompetent, in desperate need of her strong male protection. She was the hero, and I was the damsel in distress. I remained silent during her soliloquy, taking slow, deliberate sips of my iced tea. The bitterness I tasted didn't come from the slice of lemon floating among the ice. It was the sour taste of contempt, the sharp, metallic flavor of a trap being set. I let her words hang in the air, watching her, studying her as I would study historical documents, searching for the lie between the lines. After the main course was cleared away by a quiet waiter, she made her move. With a subtle, almost theatrical gesture, she slid a manila folder across the polished mahogany table. She made a soft, sinister shh sound as she stopped right in front of my hands. "These are just some basic documents, Mom Sylvia," she said, her tone a soothing whisper, "just to ensure you're taken care of. In case you're ever unable to make decisions for yourself, Emma and I can intervene." My hands were steady as I opened the folder. My heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but my hands didn't tremble. The titles on the documents leaped out at me, stark and clinical under the dim, expensive lighting. Durable power of attorney. The power to sell my home, my car, everything Robert and I had built together. The power as my health proxy. The power to stand by my bedside in the hospital and decide whether I should live or die. Living trust. The power to become the masters of my legacy. She wasn't asking for a little help. She was asking for the keys to my entire existence, my past, my present, and my future, all under the disguise of love and concern. I looked up from the papers, maintaining my serene expression, my voice steady. A life of teaching rebellious teenagers had taught me to hide a growing tide of fury. "And Emma?" I asked, carefully measuring and calming my words. "Does she know about this?" Marcus smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the thin, satisfied, colorless smile of a predator who knows his prey is cornered. The final chilling confirmation of his victory. It's a smile I'll carry with me to the grave. "She completely agrees," he said, leaning back in his chair with an air of finality. Emma said, "You've sacrificed your whole life, Mom. It's time for you to rest and let us handle things. You don't have to worry anymore about complicated things like money." The phrase hung in the air between us, dense and suffocating, as if a woman who had managed a household budget for 50 years, who had taught American history to generations of students, who had navigated the complexities of life, love, and loss, suddenly could not understand the numbers on a page. Not only had she insulted my intelligence, but she had belittled the entirety of my life's experience. In that single condescending phrase, she'd turned me into a foolish and incompetent child. She had taken the very essence of my love, my sacrifice, and transformed it into the weapon she would use to disarm me. In that moment, a cold and terrible clarity descended upon me. The flowers at the wedding, the whispers, the disdainful looks were not mere offenses. They were the first confrontations of a war, and this folder, this smile, this astounding arrogance was the official declaration. He was not just my daughter's husband. He was my enemy, and I knew with a certainty that froze me to the bone that the quiet, dignified life of Sylvia Monroe had come to an end. A battle had just begun. When I returned home after that dinner, I didn't turn on the lights. The click of the front door closing behind me echoed strangely loudly in the sudden and profound silence. I stepped into the familiar darkness of my living room, a darkness that had always felt comforting, but now felt threatening, filled with shadows that writhed with new and terrible meanings. The manila folder Marcus had handed me lay on the coffee table where I had dropped it. With the dim light of the moon filtering through the blinds, its pale hue seemed to glow with a toxic energy. It was a snake coiled at the heart of my home, its legal venom potent enough to paralyze my entire existence. I didn't cry. You must understand, some wounds are too deep for the simple solace of tears. The betrayal was an abyss, a void so deep it swallowed all emotion, leaving only a hollow, buzzing sensation that began in my chest and radiated to the tips of my fingers. I sat on the couch, motionless in the shadows, my hands resting heavily in my lap, as the truth washed over me in cold, merciless waves. It wasn't just Marcus, the charming predator whose smile was a carefully calibrated weapon. It was Emma, my own flesh and blood. The little one whose braid I had woven right on this living room floor, whose fevers I had soothed through long nights of worry, whose dreams I had nourished with every part of my being. She had looked at the life I had given her, the love I had poured into her, and she had agreed. She had consented to hand the reins of my existence over to a stranger. That was the blow I thought I would never recover from. I glanced around the dark room at the photographs on the mantelpiece, the pictures of Emma smiling with her baby teeth, our family trip to the Grand Canyon, Robert and me on our wedding day. Each moment captured in happiness now felt like a cruel mockery. The worn armchair where Robert used to read the newspaper, his form still present in its indentation, seemed to accuse me of my naivety. Every memory, every cherished object now served as a testament to my trusting and gullible heart. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It had been violated. It had turned into a museum of my own failure. After a while, I don't know how long it was, maybe an hour, maybe 3, I got up. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected from my body, moving as if I were underwater. There was only one place to go, a final corner of this house that seemed untouched. I crossed the kitchen, letting my hand glide over the cold, smooth surface of the granite countertop, and opened the door to the basement. The wooden steps creaked with a familiar rhythm as I descended into the cold, still atmosphere. This was Robert's study, his domain. It smelled of old paper from his countless books, the faint and clean aroma of his aftershave still lingering in the air, and a deep, comforting peace. Nothing had changed since the day he left this world. The books on the shelves were still arranged just as they always had been. His reading glasses lay next to a stack of journals on the desk, as if he had just stepped out for a moment. This was the only room in the house that still felt safe. This was the only place where the snake had not yet poisoned. I sank into his old leather armchair, the worn material creaking softly under my weight. It still molded to my form just as it always had to his. I let the darkness of the basement envelop me. My hands, which had been so steady in the restaurant, now trembled as I reached out and touched the spines of his notebooks. He was a man of lists, of plans, of silent thoughts put to paper. I ran my fingers over his neat and strong handwriting, and an overwhelming wave of deep and heartbreaking loneliness washed over me. I needed his guidance. I needed his strength. I closed my eyes and prayed for a sign, for a word, for anything to pull me from the abyss. And in the deep and utter silence of that basement, a voice responded. It wasn't Robert's voice, it was the voice of another soul, a woman whose words had been a beacon for me and for millions of others, a poet, a phenomenal woman, a testament to the resilient spirit I thought I had lost. The voice of Dr. Maya Angelou resonated in the chambers of my heart, as clear and strong as if she were right by my side. The words didn't come as a memory, but as a living and vibrant declaration. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. I wasn't going to conclude in this dark and silent room. Still, I will rise, I whispered into the darkness, and my own voice, though rough, surprised me with its sudden firmness. As I spoke it, something shifted within me. The anesthesia began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity that was revitalizing. The pride of a Monroe woman still ran through my veins. The intellect of a history teacher still resided in my mind, and my husband's secret was still in this house. My eyes turned to the farthest corner of the room, to the bare concrete wall. There, I noticed something I had seen 1,000 times but had never truly registered. A single panel of wood leaning against the concrete. Its grain ran in the opposite direction to the structure of the basement. It looked completely out of place. And then another memory surfaced, a quiet conversation with Robert years ago. He had been fixing a leaky pipe, and I had asked him about that strange board. He had just smiled. "When the serpent finally enters the house, Sylvia," he said, "you'll know where to find the weapon." The serpent was in the house. It was waiting on my coffee table upstairs, its fangs dripping with legal ink. My heart began to beat again, not with fear, but with a slow, powerful, and just rhythm. It was time to find the weapon. My determination felt cold and solid within me as I crossed the basement floor. I retrieved a small, sturdy peeling knife from Robert's old toolbox, its smooth wooden handle familiar in my hand. I inserted the tip into the thin slit between the wood panel and the concrete wall. It took some effort. The panel had been sealed there for years, a silent sentinel. With one final decisive push, the wood groaned and gave, revealing a dark, empty space behind it. And there it was, not a box, but a safe, an old black cast-iron safe, fixed directly to the foundation of the house. It looked ancient, indomitable, a relic from another era. On its face was a single combination dial. My breath caught in my throat. I had no idea what the combination might be. I closed my eyes, trying to think like Robert, a man of logic, emotion, and secrets. What numbers were the most significant to him? My fingers, now steady, turned the dial. First to my birthday, a slow and deliberate turn to the right, then to his birthday, 2 turns to the left. And finally, with a prayer on my lips, I turned the dial to the date of our wedding. I pulled the heavy handle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low metallic groan that echoed in the silent basement, the heavy iron door swung open. I looked inside, my heart pounding hard against my ribs. There was no shining gold, no stacks of cash. The inside of the safe was filled with neat and orderly folders, each labeled in my husband's meticulous handwriting, and on top of the first folder was a single thick envelope with my name written on it, Sylvia. My hands trembled again as I picked it up. I sank into the leather chair, the familiar scent of paper and the passage of time wrapping around me, and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter, several pages filled with the strong, confident handwriting I knew as well as my own. It was a message from beyond. "My dearest Sylvia," it began, and the words were so completely a hymn that a wave of pain and love washed over me, so powerful it almost made me stagger. "If you're reading this, it means I have gone and that someone has tried to take advantage of your kind and trusting nature. I'm sorry, my love, for not telling you this while I was alive. I lived modestly so that we could be rich in secret. I hid our assets to protect you from the vultures I always knew would circle, the same vultures I presume have forced you to open this safe." Vultures. The word was perfect. It was exactly what Marcus and his family were. I flipped to the next page, my eyes scanning the lines until they landed on a number so large, so impossible, that my mind refused to process it at first. I read it again and then a third time. $18 million, Sylvia. It's all protected in a series of irrevocable trusts, safe from creditors, lawsuits, and predators. It's all yours completely. 18 million. The room began to spin. I gripped the arms of the leather chair, anchoring myself while the world tilted on its axis. Robert. My calm and modest Robert. The man who drove a 10-year-old Buick, who debated for weeks about buying a new lawnmower, who insisted we bring sandwiches on trips instead of stopping at diners. He hadn't been frugal. He hadn't been stingy. He had been a guardian. A silent and brilliant protector building a fortress of wealth around me while I remained completely oblivious. All those years living simply, rejecting extravagant vacations, mending clothes instead of buying new, weren't about deprivation. They were a defense. He had been fighting a war I hadn't even known was taking place. I kept reading, my vision blurred with tears that were no longer from sadness but from deep, overwhelming gratitude. His letter detailed everything, the trusts, the investments, the layers of legal protection he had constructed. He had anticipated this exact scenario, a charming smooth talker trying to trick his widow into signing away her rights. He had seen the snake long before it showed up at my door, and then I reached the last page, the final part of his plan. In a smaller envelope inside this one he wrote, "You will find the business card of a woman named Carol Peterson. She is a lawyer. She is also, to put it mildly, as tough as nails. She knows everything about our inheritance and has been waiting for your call. She has all the tools you will need. Sylvia, my love, do not let anyone take away what I have built for you and our family. Use every last dollar if necessary to make them regret the day they decided to anger Robert Monroe's wife." My trembling fingers found the smaller envelope. Inside the box, as he had mentioned, was a single, crisp business card. The embossed letters were simple, elegant, and forceful. Carol Peterson, attorney at law. I looked at the card, observing the name. This was the moment. This was the weapon. The sadness in my heart still lingered, a deep and persistent pain. But now there was something else joining it, something cold, something firm, something powerful. It was the unwavering determination of my husband that now lived within me. I closed my hand around that small rectangle of paper. The tremor in my fingers stopped. My hand was steady now, a fist of pure unbreakable resolve. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Robert's leather armchair until the first gentle rays of morning filtered through the basement window. Carol Peterson's business card was firmly in my hand. It had become a talisman, a tangible piece of my late husband's foresight. It was no longer just a scrap of paper. It was a key, a promise, a weapon ready to be wielded. As the sun rose fully, casting long shadows over my quiet street, I climbed the stairs to the kitchen, my steps no longer heavy with sorrow, but light with a clear and unknown purpose. I stood by the phone for a full minute, took a deep breath to calm myself, and made the call. A voice answered on the second ring, a sound that was the auditory equivalent of a strong cup of black coffee, clear, warm, and brimming with a confidence that seemed to pass through the phone line and empower me. Peterson Law, this is Carol. There was no receptionist, no barriers, just the woman herself, direct and efficient. I took another breath, this one less shaky. My name is Sylvia Monroe, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I believe my late husband Robert made some arrangements with you. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound I could hear the beats of my own heart marking a determined and steady rhythm. It wasn't a silence of confusion, it was a silence of recognition. Then Carol's voice came back, softer now, with a new hint of intimacy that felt like she had just closed the door of an office to speak privately with a lifelong friend. Mrs. Monroe, she said, and the way she pronounced my name, not with pity, but with a deep and resonant respect, felt like a warm embrace. I have been waiting for your call for 2 years. Robert told me you were the smartest woman he had ever known. He also said you were incredibly patient. I suppose your patience has finally run out. Her office, located in a sleek skyscraper downtown with views stretching all the way to Stone Mountain, was not what I expected. There were no dusty leather-bound books or mahogany walls designed to intimidate and overwhelm. The space was modern, airy, and filled with light. And on the walls, instead of bland landscapes or corporate art, there were vibrant and powerful works by African-American artists. A print by Jacob Lawrence, a collage by Romara Bearden. It was a place that celebrated strength, history, and resilience. It was the office of a warrior, not just a lawyer. Carol Peterson, for her part, was equally formidable. She was an attractive woman in her 50s, dressed in a meticulously tailored power suit that conveyed authority and undeniable success. Her eyes were sharp, she missed nothing, and when she stood up to greet me, her handshake was firm and strong. But what impressed me the most was her gaze. She didn't look at me with the pity I had seen in the eyes of the wedding usher, nor with the condescension I had noticed in Patricia. She looked at me with respect, with a deep understanding. She didn't see a victim, she saw an equal. In that single look, she chased away my loneliness. Robert had told me that this day would come. He insisted, indicating for me to sit in a comfortable chair in front of her expansive glass desk. Her voice was calm, a statement of fact, not surprise. The day when someone would look at you and think you were easy prey. She opened a sleek metal file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder with Robert's name on the cover. She spread it out on the desk between us, and it was like looking at the blueprints of my husband's mind. There were diagrams of trust funds, asset charts, and layers upon layers of overlapping legal protections. It was a fortress built of paper and ink, designed by a master strategist. Her husband was a genius, Carol said, with a tone of genuine admiration in her voice. A financial architect? Look at this. She tapped on a clause on one of the pages. This is a bulletproof spendthrift provision. It's designed to protect the trust from exactly this type of predatory attack. Even if you had signed that power of attorney that Marcus gave you, he wouldn't have been able to touch a cent of the principal. This entire structure was created to withstand a siege. A wave of relief so deep that it was almost dizzying washed over me. The money was safe, Robert's legacy was secured, but as I exhaled, letting the tension of the past few days drain from my shoulders, Carol shook her head, a stern and challenging air replacing her smile. Not losing your money is one thing, she said, her voice turning as hard as steel. Letting him have his way is another. Robert didn't build this fortress for you to simply hide behind its walls. He created it to give you an arsenal. He didn't want you to play defensively, Sylvia. He wanted you to strike. The fire ignited by Maya Angelou's words in the dark solitude of my basement now roared like hell. The last remnants of the scared and invisible woman from the wedding faded away. I leaned forward, my palms flat against her cold glass table, and felt the power shift, not just in the room, but deep within my very soul. My voice, when I spoke, was firm, clear, and ready for battle. So what do we do? What? A slow smile spread across Carol Peterson's face. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a great white shark that just caught the scent of blood in the water. A smile of righteous and astonishing fury. "We don't just stop him, Sylvia," she said, her eyes shining with a terrifying and beautiful light. "We annihilate him, not with emotion, but with the crushing weight of the law. We will request his financial records for the last 5 years. We will expose his debts, his secrets, his other victims. We will build a case so solid, so devastating, that he will spend the rest of his life as a warning to other predators." A signal of the profound danger of underestimating a widow from Atlanta. The week that followed my meeting with Carol was one of the strangest of my life. I became an actress preparing for the role of my life, not for a stage of lights and velvet curtains, but for the discreet carpeted stage of my living room. My intended audience was a predator. My script was a carefully woven web of deceit, and the stakes were my very soul. Carol's team, 2 silent and efficient professionals who moved with the stealthy grace of ghosts, came to my house and transformed it. They installed state-of-the-art recording devices so small they were practically invisible. A tiny, powerful camera lens was hidden in the eye of a ceramic bird on the mantelpiece. A sensitive microphone was disguised inside a new smoke detector that looked harmless on the ceiling. My home, the place where I felt so violated and exposed, became my fortress, my strategic command center. My preparation for this performance didn't involve studying legal documents. Carol and her team of paralegals took care of that, building an arsenal of facts and figures. My role was more subtle, more primal. My task was to study human nature. That's why I didn't read law books. I went back to Shakespeare. In the quiet of my study, I revisited the great tragedies. I studied Lear's descent into madness, marveling at how vulnerability could be as real as it is a representation. I analyzed Iago's masterful manipulation, how he used honesty as a disguise for his lies. I studied Lady Macbeth's portrayal as the kind and innocent hostess, her hands in a metaphorical sense, dripping with blood. I was learning the art of the mask. I spent hours in front of the bathroom mirror, not to check my appearance, but to dismantle it. I practiced dropping my shoulders in a specific way, creating an image of defeat. I practiced a slight and almost imperceptible tremor in my hand when reaching for a glass of water. I practiced a look of empty confusion and helplessness in my eyes, the expression of a mind beginning to unravel. I was creating my character from the inside out. Sylvia Monroe, the fragile, frightened, and utterly defeated widow, ready to trade her world for a piece of security. When I felt the character had rooted itself in me, I took the first step. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus's number, my heart beating in a steady, cold rhythm. When he answered, I let a manufactured tremor of panic creep into my voice, an anxious and desperate tone I had perfected after days of rehearsal. "Marcus, it's me. It's Mom," I began, pausing as if I needed to gather strength to speak. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and you were right. I'm scared, Marcus. I'm all alone in this big house, and I'm scared. I want to sign those papers. I need you to protect me." The silence on the other end was brief, but in it I felt his euphoria, his triumph radiating through the line, followed by a soft, almost inaudible sigh of relief. The sound of pure, raw greed, reaching its target. "Oh, Mom Sylvia, that's wonderful news," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "That's the wisest decision you could make. I'm so glad you understand that we're on your side. How about I come by this Wednesday? I can bring a notary with me. We'll get everything sorted out quickly. That way, you won't have to worry about anything ever again." The bait was set. The fish was on the line, swimming eagerly toward the boat. The next call was more difficult. It was the one I dreaded, the part of the act that felt less like performance and more like a necessary cruelty. Emma called me that afternoon, her voice a familiar mix of worry and relief. "Mom, Marcus just told me you're going to sign the papers. Are you sure? You seemed so uncertain." This was the most crucial part of my performance. I let out a long, weary sigh, one I had practiced to convey the weight of decades of exhaustion. "I'm old, dear," I said, my voice soft and fragile, the voice of a woman giving in. "I'm tired. All these decisions is too much for me right now. Maybe your husband is right. Perhaps it's time for me to rest and be taken care of." There was a pause, and then I heard the exact response I knew would come. The response he had taught her to give: relief. "Oh, Mom, I knew you'd understand," she said, her own tension dissipating. "He really just wants what's best for you. We do too." I murmured a silent goodbye and hung up the phone. My hand lingered on the receiver, and for a moment a sharp pain pierced through my cold determination. My daughter, my sweet, trusting daughter, was so completely under his spell that she saw her cage as a refuge. It hurt. It hurt more than anything, but I clung to the knowledge that this painful farce was also for her. I wasn't just saving myself. I was performing a painful but necessary surgery to save my daughter from the cancer that had taken hold of her life. On Tuesday night, the eve of the final act, I sat alone in my living room. The house was silent. I looked at the ceramic bird, the new smoke detector, the subtle changes in my familiar space. I felt no fear. There was no anxiety, no last-minute doubt. There was only a deep and chilling calm. I was a general in my war room, surveying the battlefield before the confrontation. Every piece was in place, every line had been rehearsed. I was defending Robert's legacy, a legacy of love and protection. I was fighting for Emma's future, a future free from the poison of her husband's greed. And above all, I was reclaiming my own dignity, a quiet act of defiance against the man who had tried to erase me. I was no longer Sylvia Monroe, the grieving widow. I had become a warrior, and my enemy was about to walk, willingly and eagerly, straight into my trap. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise on the final act of his tragedy, not mine. He arrived right on time, a testament to his enthusiasm. Accompanying him was a nervous-looking notary, a young man with shifty eyes and a damp upper lip that made him seem pulled from a corner of the smallest, most desperate part of the legal world. He glanced around the room as if he suspected the walls might hold secrets, which, of course, they did. However, Marcus was supremely confident. He was a peacock in an elegant Italian suit. He entered my home with a triumphant smile on his face, holding the manila folder against his chest as if it were a sacred relic, a trophy he had won through sheer charm and intelligence. He was the triumphant hero coming to rescue the damsel from the burdens of her own life. "Mom, Sylvia," he said, his voice brimming with a rehearsed warmth that made me feel uncomfortable. "I'm so glad you made this decision. I promise you'll feel much more secure now." He spread the documents across my coffee table, placing them right in the unwavering gaze of the hidden camera. Then he proceeded to explain each clause in a slow, condescending tone, as if he were teaching the alphabet to a particularly slow child. He used simple words, his voice soft and gentle, but his message hit like a hammer. He pointed to the lines for my signature, his carefully manicured finger tapping the page with a silent, persistent rhythm. "This gives us the ability to manage your accounts, to ensure that your bills are paid on time," he explained. "This one allows us to communicate with your doctors, so we can be fully informed about your health needs. It's just a standard procedure, Mom. All of this is done to ensure your well-being." He talked about my well-being, but his eyes were fixed on the prize, shining with an air of possessiveness. He began my performance. I nodded vaguely, my expression a carefully crafted mask of confusion and weary acceptance. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the elegant pen he offered me. "Oh, wow," I murmured, my voice intentionally thin and prepared, the voice of a woman overwhelmed. "There are so many papers, all these legal words. It's a bit overwhelming for me." "Don't worry," he reassured me, his condescension as thick as molasses. "You just need to sign here, here, and here." He pointed again to each line with the tip of the pen. "The rest is our job. We'll take care of everything from now on." I took the pen, my trembling hand, a masterpiece of a week's rehearsal, moved to the first page. I signed my name, the signature slightly shaky, the S of Sylvia a bit less firm than usual. I moved to the second page and signed again, letting out a small, weary sigh. Then, as I reached the third document, I executed my simple distraction maneuver. I let the pen slip from my fingers. It fell noisily onto the wooden floor. "Oh, how clumsy I am," I said with a shy giggle. "My hands aren't what they used to be." Marcus, always the gentleman, always the patient handler of the elderly, bent down to pick it up. In that brief, crucial moment, while his head was lowered, I lifted my gaze and noticed the ceramic bird on the shelf. I made a slight and almost imperceptible nod, a signal to Carol, who I knew was watching everything from a monitor miles away. The performance was going as planned. The trap was ready to be activated. He returned the pen to me with that same patient and indulgent smile. I signed the third page, then the fourth. I could feel his impatience growing, a subtle tension in his shoulders. He was at the finish line. I could taste his victory. Just as I was about to sign the last and most crucial page, the durable power of attorney, I paused. I let the pen hover just above the paper, a millimeter from the ink touching the line. I looked at him, my eyes wide with the feigned confusion I had practiced for a week. "Marcus, dear," I began, allowing my voice to fade as if suddenly a vague and troubling thought had invaded me. "Hey, there's something I forgot to mention." He couldn't completely hide the flash of irritation in his eyes. He was so close. "Yeah, Mom." "What is it?" she asked, her voice a strained thread of forced patience. I looked out the window as if I were trying to reach for a fleeting, elusive memory. "It's just that, well, it seems Robert might have left something else behind. Some old investments, I think he called them. Something I didn't know about until recently. I'm not very good with these things, you see. It's all just so complicated. That was the bait. The last irresistible bite specifically designed for a fish of his kind." I watched him. His posture changed completely. The concerned son-in-law mask vanished, replaced by the raw, trembling face of pure greed. His eyes, once filled with false sympathy, now gleamed with insatiable desire. This was the moment Carol had predicted. Greed had overshadowed caution. "How much?" he asked, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He leaned forward, the pretense of casual concern gone, replaced by unfiltered desire. "Is it a lot?" Keeping my gaze soft and distant, I perfectly played the role of the confused widow. "I'm not entirely sure," I said, sighing. The banker used a lot of complicated words, but he seemed to think it could be a significant amount. His hand resting on the papers on my coffee table started to tremble. Not with a rehearsed tremor like mine, but with a real, uncontrollable shake of excitement. He could no longer hide it. His voice cracked with anticipation. "How much is a lot, Mom?" "Sylvia, I need you to tell me. I need to know the total amount so I can protect it for you." Protect it? He had uttered that word. He had confessed his intentions in front of the camera. The jaws of the trap, so carefully laid and patiently lured, closed with a silent and devastating finality. He leaned toward me, his face a grotesque mask of greed, his voice a desperate and anxious whisper. "I need to know the total amount so I can protect it for you." At that precise moment, when the word protect left his lips, all pretense evaporated. The curtain fell on the character of the fragile and confused widow that I had so painstakingly constructed, and the true Sylvia Monroe, forged in the flames of loss and disdain, stepped forward. I looked at him, really looked at him, and when I spoke, my voice had changed. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity, sharp and unyielding as granite. The weakness had vanished, substituted by an authority he never imagined I possessed, a power that filled the room and seemed to suck the air from his lungs. "How much?" I repeated his question, but it was no longer a question. It was a judgment. I deliberately placed the expensive pen in the center of the coffee table, the soft click resonating like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. "Enough to hire the best lawyers," I said, and the word lawyers dripped with an icy irony that could freeze fire. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The eager, predatory smile on his lips froze and then seemed to shatter like cheap porcelain. His eyes, which had shone with the light of undeserved wealth, now widened with confusion and a growing, repugnant horror. His mind, so quick to calculate and deceive, struggled to process this sudden and impossible shift in the balance of power. What did you say?" he stammered, his voice losing its smooth, confident tone, devolving into the anxious, uncertain timbre of a child caught in a lie. I said, enunciating each word with chilling precision as my gaze penetrated him. "It's enough to hire lawyers, it's enough to hire private investigators, and it's more than enough to ensure that a piece of human garbage like you never defrauds another woman again." I no longer called him son. I no longer saw him as my daughter's husband. He was a specimen, a thing to be examined, dismantled, and discarded. The color drained from his face. His charming and appealing facade began to seriously crumble, revealing the cornered and terrified rat beneath. Blood rushed to his cheeks, a mottled and unattractive red, and then receded as quickly as it had come, leaving his skin pale and sickly. You're talking nonsense," he stammered, trying to regain his composure, attempting to reaffirm the reality in which he held control, but her voice cracked, betraying her terror. "What's wrong? Have you lost your mind?" It was her last-ditch effort, the pitiful end of an attempt to use my age, my gender, and her perception of my fragility against me. I nearly smiled at her predictability. "Oh no, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously soft, a calm eye in the storm. I had never been more lucid in my life. "You see, my mind is perfectly clear enough to know about your gambling debts in Atlantic City, the ones you thought nobody from your new life was aware of, clear enough to learn about the other 2 widows in Florida, 2 trusting women you gallantly helped before setting your sights on my daughter in my home. Clear enough to know every dirty and greedy secret you thought so well hidden beneath that $5,000 suit. I know everything." Beside her, the nervous notary began to sweat profusely, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He took half a step back toward the door, then another, his eyes wide with the raw terror of a man realizing he has married into a battle that is far beyond his comprehension. He knew he was witnessing something terrible, a participant in a crime unraveling at a terrifying speed before his very eyes. I decided it was time for the final act of this scene. I stood up from my chair. I didn't rise like an old woman with aching joints. I stood up like a queen ascending her throne, my back straight, my movements deliberate and charged with an energy he could feel in the air. I positioned myself in the center of my living room, my territory, and looked down at the man who tried to take my life from me. I had never felt so tall or so in control. "You made 2 fatal mistakes, Marcus," I told him, my voice low and firm. Each word was a decisive blow against the fragile shell of his arrogance. His first mistake was thinking I was poor. I let those words linger in the air for a moment, watching how they landed. But your second, and by far greater mistake, was thinking I was stupid. I raised my hand, not in a threatening gesture, but with slow and deliberate grace, and pointed directly at the ceramic bird on the shelf, the one with the glass eye that never blinked. "And now," I said, my voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper, a whisper that held more threat than any shout. "You should smile. You're being recorded." Just then, the door to my house burst open. Carol Peterson stepped in, a vision of righteous fury in a dark power suit. Beside her were 2 large muscular men who clearly were not lawyers. They were the private investigators. the men who had uncovered Marcus's dark secrets. Their faces were grim, and their presence filled the room with an inevitable sense of doom. Carol's eyes locked onto Marcus, pinning him in place, her voice as cold and sharp as ice breaking. "Marcus Thornfield," she proclaimed, her voice resonating with the authority of the law itself. "I am the attorney for Sylvia Monroe, and I believe you have some explaining to do about a conspiracy to commit fraud against the elderly." His last shred of self-control shattered. A muffled, inhuman sound escaped his lips. His legs buckled as if cut by the strings, and he collapsed to the floor. He fell to his knees among the disordered documents of his own failed coup, his handsome face contorted into a grotesque mask of sheer, absolute terror. The charming facade he had maintained for so long had not just faded away, it had been utterly demolished, exposing the pathetic, whimpering creature he had tried to hide. The game of chess had come to an end. The repercussions of Marcus's arrest were not a silent affair. It was a legal earthquake that sent shockwaves through the well-groomed pastures and gated communities of Buckhead, a scandal that could not be contained behind high walls or whispered phone calls. The recordings from my room were irrefutable, along with the mountain of evidence that Carol's investigators had uncovered about his past activities in Florida and his overwhelming gambling debts. The case was indisputable. It became a whispered sensation in country clubs and was reported with barely disguised glee in the social pages of Atlanta newspapers. The Thornfield family, who had built their world on a fragile structure of new money and social pretensions, found themselves plummeting into an abyss of public disgrace. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia had refused to leave her mansion for weeks. The shame was too great to bear. Her business, built on the illusion of integrity and reputation, was on the brink of collapse. Justice, it turned out, doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it comes like a hurricane, tearing the roof off a house of lies. As expected, Emma came to me. She didn't call ahead. She simply appeared at my door, her face pale and soaked with tears, her eyes burning with a desperate and misplaced loyalty that tore at my heart. "How could you, Mom?" she shouted, her voice breaking as she pushed me aside and entered the foyer. "How could you do this to my husband? You've ruined his life. You've ruined our life." I didn't argue with her. I didn't raise my voice or respond to her anger with my own. The time for that kind of confrontation had passed. I led her to the living room, the same room where the trap had been laid, and asked her to sit on the sofa. Then, without a word, I reached for a small digital recorder on the coffee table and pressed the play button. Marcus's voice filled the space. His tone, a low and urgent whisper, asked, "How much is enough, Mom? Sylvia, I need to know the total amount so I can protect him for you." I watched my daughter as she listened. I noted how the anger on her face faded, the righteous indignation flickering like a candle about to go out. It was replaced by a glimmer of doubt, of confusion. When the recording ended, I handed her a thin file. It contained the affidavits of the other 2 widows in Florida, whose stories were disturbingly similar to mine. She read it, her hands trembling so violently that the papers whispered as they moved. She saw the account statements from the Atlantic City casinos, the cold, hard numbers that told a story of desperation and deceit. She saw the evidence. She stood there for a long while, the papers on her lap, her gaze fixed on a point on the distant wall. The silence in the room was heavy with the sound of her world crumbling, of a love story revealing itself to be a horror film. Her face, once a mask of fury, now crumbled into a mosaic of confusion, horror, and finally a devastating understanding that began to surface. She looked at me, her eyes no longer filled with accusation, but instead with the wide, empty terror of a lost child. "You were going to put me in a nursing home, weren't you?" she whispered, her words barely audible, "and also take all of Dad's money." It wasn't a question. It was the final, terrible piece of the puzzle clicking into place in her mind. I didn't need to answer. The truth was her own verdict, freshly delivered to her heart. A few weeks later, I sat once again in front of Carol Peterson's shiny glass desk. But this time, the documents we were handling were not a weapon, but a blueprint for the future. It was my new will, a testament not to an ending, but to a new beginning. Carol reviewed the details, but my mind was clear. My daughter's name, Emma, was still there. I am a mother, and a mother's love, even when wounded, endures. But her inheritance now came with a condition, a path toward redemption and purpose. She would only inherit her share if she agreed to join the board and actively participate in managing a new charity. The bulk of Robert's legacy, $15 million, would serve as startup capital for this foundation. I signed the last page with a steady hand, resolute. The Robert and Sylvia Monroe Foundation was born. Its mission was simple and clear: to provide free legal assistance and advocacy to elderly individuals who had become victims of financial fraud. The money that Robert had worked so hard for would not be spent on designer handbags or luxury cars. Instead, it would become a shield for the vulnerable, a sword for the defenseless. His legacy of protection would continue, reaching far beyond the walls of our small home. The legal system moved at its own pace, but its conclusion was decisive. Marcus Thornfield was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Emma, with her eyes finally wide open, quietly filed for divorce. On a crisp autumn afternoon, when the leaves in my garden were transforming into bright shades of red and gold, I walked through my house. I gathered every photograph of Marcus and Emma during their time together. Pictures of their wedding, their honeymoon, spontaneous snapshots of them smiling. A life that was a beautiful lie. I carefully placed everything in a sturdy cardboard box. I didn't burn them. Anger had been a useful fuel. But the fire had served its purpose. It was time for a different kind of alchemy. I carried the box to the curb and gently placed it into the large blue recycling bin right next to the newspapers that had reported on its downfall. "There are things that can't be repaired," I whispered softly into the fresh afternoon air, "but they can be transformed into something useful." I turned and walked back into my house, closing the door behind me. I felt an intense lightness, as if a great weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying had been lifted from my soul. The air inside smelled sweet and clean. This house was once again mine, completely and absolutely mine, and I was free. It had been 2 years since the Thornfield empire crumbled. 2 years since the storm passed, leaving a clear sky in its wake. If you were to enter my living room today, you wouldn't see the somber memorial photo of my dear Robert on the mantel. Instead, there's a new image. Me, at 73 years old, standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, my face lit up by joyful, uninhibited laughter, raising a glass of red wine in a toast to the world. That trip to Paris, alone, was the first thing I did once the dust settled. It was a pilgrimage to a life I had never allowed myself to live. I spent 2 weeks wandering through the Louvre, enjoying warm croissants by the Seine, and one night I even let a charming white-haired gentleman invite me to dance at a small jazz club in Montmartre. I was no longer Sylvia Monroe, the widow hidden behind a fortress of flowers. I was simply Sylvia, a free woman exploring a world that had suddenly opened before me. The Monroe Foundation remains my work, my purpose. I consult with Carol and bring the heart that drives the legal machinery. But my life now is a symphony, and the foundation, while important, is just the solid resonant bass, not the whole melody. My kitchen, once a place of solitary sacrifice, is now filled with laughter and the delightful chaos of shared creation. Emma comes over every weekend. She arrives not with the heavy burden of guilt, but with bright anticipation. We don't talk about Marcus. His name is a ghost that we have both agreed to let fade away. Instead, we enroll together in a Creole cooking class. We filled my kitchen with the intense aromas of arugula and the holy trinity of onions, bell peppers, and celery, trying out new recipes and laughing until our sides hurt when inevitably the gumbo would scorch. One Saturday, while we were kneading the dough for bread together, our hands dusted with flour, she suddenly stopped. She reached out and clasped my hand with hers, warm and firm. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see your strength before." I stroked her face, wiping a speck of flour from her cheek, feeling my heart swell. "You have nothing to apologize for, my love," I replied gently. "You just need to help me finish baking this bread. Creating new happy memories is the best way to cover up old scars." And in that moment, as she smiled at me, I knew we had healed. My garden has become the pride of the neighborhood. Along the driveway, I've planted a row of deep, velvety red roses. I call them the roses of dignity. I tend to them every morning, and it's there, among the flowers, that I often read the letters that come to the foundation. Last week, a letter arrived from a woman in Texas. She was 81 years old, and with our help, she had just reclaimed the family ranch that her nephew had tricked her into signing away. "He took my money," she wrote in shaky yet proud handwriting, "but the worst thing he took from me was my belief in myself. Your story, Mrs. Monroe, helped me find it again." I folded the letter, and a tear of joy rolled down my cheek. I cut the most beautiful rose from its stem, brought it inside, and placed it in a vase on my dining table. Each new flower feels like a life reclaimed, a spirit restored. On a warm night in Atlanta, as the fireflies began their nighttime ballet in the twilight, Emma and I sat on the old porch swing, the chains creaking a soft, familiar rhythm. "Do you ever think, Mom," she whispered, her head resting on my shoulder, "what if it weren't for him? Your life would have been like this, just quietly living out your days in this house." I looked up at the vast, starry sky of Georgia and took a deep breath of the sweet southern air. "That snake," I said, my voice calm and filled with a peace I had earned. She entered our lives and tried to write a sad final chapter for me, a melancholic story about a lonely old woman who was deceived, overlooked, and forgotten. I paused, a small smile creeping onto my lips, but he didn't know. He didn't realize that instead of writing an ending, he was handing me a completely new book, one with hundreds of blank pages, and he gave me a golden pen to write with. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful and strong daughter, and squeezed her hand. "Your father's legacy was never about the money in the bank, my love. That was just a tool. The true legacy was the freedom to write the story I wanted. And dear girl," I said as the first star of the night shone brightly above us, "my story has just begun. My story has just begun. But now that I've shared a piece of my heart, I realize that what I want most is to hear yours. You know, when we sit together, stories have a way of flowing out. Today, I wanted to open my heart a little, and now I would love to hear from you girls. I know that a simple click on a screen, a like, a subscription, or a share might seem like a small and fleeting act to many. But for me and for so many other silent voices that need to be heard, each of those clicks is like a little light turning on in a dark room. It's a subtle way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. Just a simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me and the motivation I need to keep sharing these stories. After sharing my story, something changed in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to listen to me. And now that I've shared a piece of my heart, I realize that what I desire most is to hear yours. Down in the comments section, I would love for you to share a part of your own story with me. Tell me about a time you felt unheard. Speak to me about a passion that others might have dismissed as silly. Or tell me about a moment when you discovered your strength even in the smallest and quietest way. I promise to read your words. I'll carry them with me because your story, dear ones, is important. We want to build Gritty Ages as a community where we can share these experiences from the heart. I know you have personal stories that can sometimes be hard to share even with family or friends. I'm here to listen, to share your joys and your sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. And if today you don't have a struggle like mine to share, then tell me about a moment of joy. Share something good that has happened. Share it with me. That would be a wonderful gift, a source of strength that helps all of us who are watching to heal and find a little more faith in our days. If you find yourself watching this on your television, don't hesitate to grab your phone and look for my channel, Gritty Ages. I'd also love to share this space with you. Let's make it a community where we truly listen to each other. A place where no woman ever has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you again for being here with me today. It really means a lot. So, would you be willing to share the first story with me now?